Quinn, thank you so much for joining us today. You are the founder of Reading to Connect. And can you tell us what is Reading to Connect?
So, Reading to Connect is my baby.
Love it.
Reading to Connect is a community, it's a resource, it's tools, it's a way for parents to understand reading as a way to connect with their children. Um, Not just a literacy tool, but a parenting tool to stay deeply engaged with their children, and also to build a legacy of love and connection with their child.
That's amazing. How did you get to this point?
Okay, this is such a question. You know, Megan, we both have podcasts, right?
Yes.
And I'm one of those people. I was reading about you. I listened to a couple of your episodes, and I just love to dig a bit deeper, right? So I'm going
Yeah,
to try not to go down like a rabbit hole of
I love
information
it.
for you. But it basically started, right? One cold day. No, it started on Instagram, just sharing books with people. Like the books I read with my son,
Hmm.
started sharing them on Instagram. And then I started to build a community around it because I started to sell books through like this MLM called Usborne Books. You ever heard of Usborne?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. It is now Paper Pie, but it started as Usborne. I've always loved books. I spent most of my childhood in the library. I've always been a very avid reader, been reading to my son since he was in the womb. As I started to build a community around it, working with Usborne, I started to really get engaged with parents and what their needs were. It was very hard to bring parents over who were not already reading with their kids when you spoke to them about things like literacy, because the common misconception is that it's being done in school. Why do I need to read with my kids at home, right?
Hmm.
And so over time, as I'm building my relationship with my son, I'm in the community doing read alouds, I'm, doing and observing different things. I started to notice that parents are not really tapping into what reading can be. It's been a long cry since the LeVar Burtons of the world on
Yeah.
Reading Rainbow when we were learning about the magic of books and what they could do for homes.
Hmm.
So Reading to Connect, formerly called Parenting and Bonding with Children's Books, but that's way too long, right? Is a way to remind parents and families and educators and anybody who has the ability or a connection to children that reading is much more than a literacy tool. It's a way to engage children and really deeply get to know them and allow them to get to know us.
Hmm. Absolutely. Now, when you were a child, were you read to outside of school or was it a
Yeah.
solo act?
When I was a child, I was read to.
Hmm.
I think that the thing that really got me is my mother, my father, my grandmother modeling reading for me. I was always sneaking, sneaking my mom's books. What I'll call, I said this somewhere else, and they were like, "What's that?" But church fiction is what I'll call it, like
Oh,
the Mary Monroe, like the different like the books about, fiction books about what happened in the Black church, right?
yeah.
So I was always stealing those books from my mom and kind of reading them. But I think that my mother reading to me, them modeling reading, and then my mother really having the foresight to say, that is the only place I'll allow you to go in a public bus. Um, I was born in Camden, raised in a small town in South Jersey, and my mother was very protective.
Hmm.
But that was the one place after school I was able to go to the Cinnaminson Library on the bus by myself, and I would spend hours in the library, and it was like the most awesome experience ever.
That's great. That's awesome. Yeah, my mom cleaned houses on the weekends,
Okay.
and my she would take my sister and I to the library while she cleaned a house, and it was so transformational, but similar to your mom, like it was a safe place, right? And
Yeah.
it was a place where I can't speak for my sister, but I felt such freedom. It was like, wow,
Yeah.
look at all these books, and the librarians were so helpful, and it's so cool you got to ride the bus by yourself there. Like
Yes.
that's such an amazing experience.
Hmm.
And then you had that love of reading instilled in you and modeled for you. Did you keep that up through college and beyond, or is it something you came back to in adulthood?
It ebbs and flows. especially if I remember it, I was actually thinking about in this moment. And I tell parents now, because so many people they want to raise readers, right? But
Mhm.
raising a reader is not always going to look the way that you think it's going to look. Reading and the skills that you pick up through reading are going to manifest in different ways. So I tell parents you might not raise a kid who's like what Barack Obama sitting in a room just going through books,
Mhm.
50 million books
Right.
in a day, but regardless, it'll be beautiful. I feel like I lost track of the question. I'm sorry there, Megan.
Oh no, that's okay. It's so that was modeled for you, it was instilled in you, and then through high school, college, and into adulthood, did that stay with you or did you come back to it later?
There we go. It stayed with me, but I remember like pivotal times in my life, especially in my childhood, where I may have ventured away from books, just
Mhm.
as we like coming of age, we made different discoveries and
Yeah.
other things seemed to be more interesting, right? I had this teacher, and I've been looking for her for so long. So if anybody's listening to this and you run into a Jennifer Jablonski,
Jennifer
not find her
Jablonski.
anywhere. She in the fifth or sixth grade, I think I had lost track of reading, but she brought me back. She had this, you remember those wire like spinning carts that they would have in the bookstores?
Yes.
Okay, she had one of those in her classroom. She was my language arts or English teacher, I forget what it was
Hmm.
called at that point. And she introduced me to Lois Duncan.
Mm.
And Lois Duncan is the author behind the movie. What is it called? I Know What You Did Last Summer.
Hmm.
But she has so many books. And when I picked that first one up, like I was hooked. And then I was reading from then. Many of the things that I did probably throughout my life, my childhood and, high
Hmm.
school, all come back to reading. It's when I think about it, because you sit down when you start a business and you're trying to reach people, even as far as like writing a bio, you have to think about those times in your life when it really showed up for you, right? And
Yeah.
I'm just like, wow, like this was always the thing.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
This
always
was
been a
always
part
the
of
thing.
you.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's so cool. And then, so you went to Rutgers,
Hmm.
go Knights, right?
Say it again.
Go
Yeah, go
Knights. Yeah.
Scarlet Knights.
Scarlet Knights, Scarlet
Yeah,
Knights. That's what
Scarlet
it is.
Knights. If
Um,
anybody's listening, I'm sorry. I'm not. It feels like so long ago.
it wasn't that long ago, Quinn.
Uh,
So, is this something you studied in college, or what did you end up studying?
I actually went to college for criminal justice and sociology. I thought I was going to be an accountant after I watched Catch Me If You Can with Leonardo DiCaprio, right? Because I
Yes.
always loved math. And I was like, wow, crime and math, like together. I
Yeah.
was so bored. I was so bored. And I was like, I cannot do this for the rest of my life, right? So I stayed in criminal justice, picked up sociology, grad school, I did community development. And I think that just the all of those things kind of weave together.
Yeah. Yeah,
And
absolutely.
yeah, and what I'm doing now, the building up of community and working with parents and really working to strengthen families, and just being on the forefront of the connection that we see amongst families. It's all been like an interesting way to come back to it.
Yeah. And so there's a lot that I want to unpack with this community that you've built and how you're helping families. Um, but what would you say is the state of literacy, I don't know, as a whole, or maybe within children in the United States right now? I think my, if you asked me, I
Hmm.
would say we're not a country of readers. And
Okay.
um, even you saying like a lot of parents think that their kids will get that in school. Well, if you don't
Yeah.
go to school until, you're 4 or 5, there's a lot of
Yeah.
time in between there where you haven't been reading. Is that accurate or what are you seeing in your experience?
So what's interesting is that I stay away from the word literacy in my
Okay.
communities because I feel like it scares parents away and it makes
Hmm.
them feel like reading is work. I'm a
Okay.
huge advocate of not making reading feel like work, even as far as like and we'll talk about later my engage method. Um, Asking questions that don't feel like school, like that
Hmm.
don't feel like the SAT, but are based on the relationship and connection and learning about your children and learning about your family. But I will say that most of us know that literacy there's a huge gap, right? Um, amongst families and certain communities. And now that we're in this digital world where our kids have videos and content available to them all day long, kids are reading less and less for pleasure, much less for pleasure. And the problem there is that so they will read in school, right? They will read certain like different like when I talk to parents about reading for kids, I'm like, read them anything. You can read them pick up a poetry book, the newspaper, like the back of the cereal box used to be much more interesting back
Yeah.
then now, right?
Yeah.
But our kids are not thinking critically.
Hmm.
They hear news and they believe it as fact as soon as
Hmm.
they hear it. They listen to a TikToker and they say the sky is pink. And then they walk outside and say, well, why is the sky blue? Like
Hmm.
they believe these things as soon as they hear it. They're not learning to think for themselves. And I think that many of the things that we have access to are removing our ability to think for ourselves. All of the chat GPTs and all the AI and all the things. It's like you do you even have to think anymore? Do you have an
Hmm.
original thought? And I think that that is the magic that we're losing in books. And that is the biggest problem with literacy is that if as parents, we're not taking ownership of the power to read to our children in their homes, and we're losing that we're losing a big piece of what life can be for our children as far as what they go out and do in the world and how they express themselves in the world, how they help other people in the world, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And those connections that you make, whether you're reading fiction or nonfiction, the back of the cereal box to the
Hmm.
real world, you can't
Yes.
get the same way in other forms of media. Like media literacy is
Hmm.
different, and that's really fascinating. What are you seeing in your communities that parents are coming to you most? Like, what are the first things that they're coming with you on this journey and saying, I need help with this, or I don't know where to start. How do you start with parents and families?
Most of them just don't feel like they have the time.
Hmm.
They don't have time to read to their children. Many of them, when I ask them, what is it that you want your child to, I love to ask, what do you want your child to remember about you and your relationship the most? And it's always something along the lines of that I was always here for them, that I love them unconditionally, that they can do whatever they want to do in this world. And I don't think that a lot of parents understand that time that you take reading can be the moment that you remind them of that. It can be the moment where you're talking to them about your values in a way that they can understand because books give us the words to use to talk to our children at their level. And I think that that's like the real power of using books to do a lot of the things that we want to do in parenting. So in my communities, I hear from people I know, even the ones that say, I know what reading can do for my family. Like I know that it'll help build their vocabulary. I know that it will, do all these things. It's reading is the foundation of learning.
Hmm.
But how? Like, how do I do it? How do I know that when I walk away from this book, it has been an effective experience? It'll be an experience that will stick with them. And so I think that there's so many books out there, books that I love and I adore, right? Jim Traley's The Read Aloud Handbook, Sarah Mackenzie, The Read Aloud Family, and Megan Fox or Meg Fox. I forget exactly what the book is called, but I'll send it to you. I'll send you a link. Um, they tell us the importance. They might have a line or two or a chapter on how to read to our kids, but many parents still have questions about how exactly do I read to my child? And that question kind of took me aback, right? It's like,
Hmm.
what do what do you, what do you mean? How do
Yeah, what do they
how do you
mean?
read?
Yeah.
I think that you feel it when you're reading to your child and you're kind of just going through the book. It
Hmm.
doesn't feel great. Like it doesn't feel great when you're just opening and you're just reading word by word. You don't know if they're paying attention. Are you even paying attention? Or are they picking up what you're putting down? Like
Yeah. Yeah.
you have no idea. And then many parents, they feel that they have to, the goal is just to finish the book. Like that's the goal to open the book and get to the end, but there's so much magic in between the pages that many parents might be missing out on. And I
Mhm.
think that that's a huge thing.
And I want to hear about the engage method. But do you see, is there any difference between like boys and girls and how they approach reading, or is it more about the ages that they are and how they approach reading, or a combination of both?
I think it's different across the spectrum, right?
Hmm.
Depending on what it is that our children are raised around and what's modeled for them. I think that boys hop into things like graphic novels and
Hmm.
manga a lot earlier than
Hmm.
girls do. Like they need that excitement from page to page in order, to keep them engaged.
Hmm.
Um, and I feel like they're less active. Girls are less active during reading time. So a
Hmm.
lot of the parents that I talk to that have young boys, including me, how I talk about many times my son being what I call a bounce about kid.
Yeah.
Like I'm reading to him and he's like doing a cartwheel across the room, and I'm like, are you? But he's listening.
Yeah.
And many scholars, many literacy scholars will tell you. Your child does not have to be sitting there
Hmm.
still intently looking at you in order for them to be listening to you when you're reading to them. They could be doing any number of things. And I know this from my own home or even read alouds I've done in the community. You stop and you ask that child a question about the book and they know what's going on.
Yeah.
But many of them, I mean, like us, we're at work, we doodle.
Yeah.
We're tapping our feet, we're moving around, making coffee. We're listening, we're engaged, but
Yeah.
I might not sit here and stare at you
Right.
the
Right.
whole time.
Right. Yeah, it's funny. My son for a while never sat at dinner, and I think being at school all day and having to sit and following those rules, like they just
Yeah,
have to get that energy out in a
yeah,
way that I see differently, presented differently in my daughter. Um, and it used to bother me, and then I was like, why does it matter? Like if he needs to stand up to wiggle around a little bit while he eats, just let him. So
yeah.
same thing with reading. I like that you point out like you don't necessarily have to be sitting still and exactly how you see it in TV or the movies or whatever.
Mhm.
So tell me about the engage method because this is something that you've created. It's very exciting and how you work with families. Tell us about it.
Yeah, so the engage method comes after years of, of working with families and working with my son and reading to him and really trying to get the most out of a book and trying to get the
Hmm.
most out of reading time and allowing myself and families to walk away knowing that they've instilled something in their child that could last a lifetime, right?
Hmm.
So the engage method has, it's a framework. It has 6 steps, but you don't have to use every step every time you sit down with a book. And what I find with the engage method is that it allows parents to really be able to go through the book. It's a journey through the book. So if you start from the beginning of the engage method, it'll give you ways to bring your child into the book with you, bring your child into the world of the book. And that's when the real magic happens, right? It will, using the engage method, it'll help your child feel more seen by you. They'll know that you're paying attention to the things going on in their lives. They'll know that you're paying attention to their friend groups and you're paying attention to what their interests are, what shows they're into. As you're selecting books, you're much more well versed in how to choose a book. Using the engage method, parents are empowered to go into the library, go into their local bookstore, and know that I'm choosing books that align with my family's values, what they want, their child. We can't protect our children from anything, right?
Hmm.
We can't protect them from so many things, but we can ensure that the content that we're bringing into our homes through the books that we select are in line with what we want our children to know and learn, right?
Yeah.
So the engage method is really a framework. I'm sorry, somebody sent me a message yesterday after they purchased my course and they said, Quinn, this is so much more than a method. Like
Uh-huh.
it's so much more than a method because it really gives parents tools in order to just really deeply connect with their child. And that's what so many of us are missing.
That's I'm excited for listeners to hear this and to go to your website and to engage with you on the engage method, and take part in that because one of the things I was so impressed with is
Mhm,
when we first connected, I was like, oh, we're going to talk about literacy and reading. And then when I looked at your work, it is so much more than that. It is about deeply connecting relationally, as a parent
mhm.
and child or caretaker and child, and
Yes,
then as a family unit, whatever you consider that.
yes.
And the power of that and to approach reading in that way is I had never thought about it before. I'll admit that. And I'm kind of embarrassed to say that
No, no,
because
don't be.
reading,
Yeah.
at least to me, has been such a community, like in many ways, shapes and forms,
Mhm.
but it's so much less intimidating, right? Like as a parent, it feels like, oh, I have ownership over this versus something that you said before when I used the L word, literacy,
Yeah.
of you immediately go into academia, you go into school, you go into SATs and testing,
Mhm.
and this breaks away from all of that. And it breaks away
Yeah.
from what, the point of literature and reading is. It's that connection. So, um, it's wonderful. I like that someone pointed out to you that it's so much more than just a method. It's this entire framework.
And the
Um,
gold, I'm sorry, the gold is that you're still getting all of that.
yeah.
Like you're still getting all of the benefits that they've been telling us for years that we get from reading and that we'll give to our children through reading. But you know, as a parent or as a caregiver or as a caretaker or an educator, that you're really pouring something meaningful into your child
Hmm.
besides just the literary aspect of it.
Yeah. And then at what, or let me ask this question. I think even as someone who loves books, is very comfortable in libraries, I have always felt a little intimidated talking to librarians, who, by the way, are like the most amazing people in the world. They're awesome. And even in bookstores where I'm like, I don't really know exactly what I'm looking for. Do you have any advice on getting advice and getting suggestions from whether it's your local independent bookstore or your librarian, or if you're going on Goodreads or reaching out to your teachers? Like, what should you be asking it. And maybe it goes back to sort of what you said about what's important to your family and what your
Yeah.
values are. Like, how do you recommend parents approach that?
So, two things, right? The first is I'll touch on what you said first is that don't be afraid to talk to them because that's what they're there for. And not only that, it's what they love. So I've been a bookseller twice in my life. So once at Barnes and Noble,
Mhm.
when right out of college, and it was a wonderful experience. And it was actually where I learned that I did not have to finish a book.
I want to hear more about that later.
Yeah, it was like mind blown. Like, what do you mean? And then the second thing is that already said that's what they're there for. That's what they love. You don't have to be afraid to talk to them, and you can go in with your own list,
Mhm,
take notes of what your family is into, what you want your family to learn, the stories that you want to share with them. That's one of the powerful things about the engage method is that it really causes you or it gives you the tools to reflect on your journey, right? What the stories that you want to share with your children, maybe that you didn't even think about before, that show your power as a human being, that show your resilience in life.
mhm,
And there is no greater teacher for our children than us,
mhm,
right? They want to hear our stories. And so when we sit down with the book and we're given the tools to be able to really extract, when you're reading, stuff pops into you, you're making connections all the
mhm,
time. But if you're not prepared for those connections, if you're not thinking about what it is in your story that you want to share with your child, it's a missed opportunity.
mhm.
And so I talk about I'm veering off. Are you sticking with me,
Yeah,
Megan?
absolutely. I was just thinking about my journey into the book Hands Are Not for Hitting with, with one of my children. But it was
Got
one of
you.
these things where it was like, I don't know how to talk about this with them, and reinforce what, hands are not for hitting. And we
Yeah.
also had a pacifier book of like passies are not forever.
Hmm.
But it was one of those things where I went to the library and I was like, hi. Like
Yeah.
this is what I'm dealing with. And I don't want them to feel like they're bad, but this is a behavior we need to work on. And
Hmm.
had these wonderful recommendations, and even recommendations that weren't directly related to the specific, or in my mind, directly related to the specific thing that we were addressing at that moment. So I
Mhm.
totally get what you're saying.
Yeah.
Um, and I think also, and not to totally get off task, because I want to talk about this later, is the books that we were raised with. There's so many more books. Like if we only
Yeah.
stick with those, which we may love, um, there's a whole world out there that we may be missing. So
Yeah. So many things there that I can touch on, and it's
yeah, go for it. Go for
that was one of the
it.
reasons why. Well, I'll say this too. In the course, I have a family reading blueprint. And
Mhm.
as you're going through the course, you're filling out this family reading blueprint, and it has instruction on it for your librarian, for your associate at
Mhm.
Barnes and Noble, wherever you shop for books.
Yeah.
And you go in with this blueprint and you say, this is what my family needs. Um, I talked to a few librarians as I was building the course out, really, really trying to make it special and resonate with families. And I'm like, what do you need to know about a family in order to be able to give them books?
Mhm.
One of the main things I heard back
What?
is I just need to know that the family is not afraid of me choosing the wrong book.
Mm.
It's okay if the book is not great,
Mhm.
if it didn't resonate with your family, right? Because that's information for you as well.
Mhm.
What did your child like about the book? What didn't they like about that book? And take that information with you the next time. One of the awesome parts of the engagement method is my favorite part, and I will tell you this part. It's the last part of the engage method. It's the ending swap, and the ending swap is beautiful because it allows you to create new worlds with your children that only
Mm.
you and them will understand. And it's like you read this book and you go through it and you may have hated it, right? And the ending thought came up because I read this. I've been, me and Aiden, my son Aiden, he's
Yeah.
10. We've been through so many books that we did not enjoy.
Yeah.
And I put questions and prompts in the course, but I usually say to him, well, what would you have done? How would you have ended the book?
Mm.
And it allows them and you to think critically about the book, to be creative, right?
Mhm.
And you start to build these stories together. And it's such a beautiful thing. So don't be afraid of a bad book.
Right, right. Something that's not necessarily resonating the right way,
Yeah, yeah.
or the way you thought. And the other thing that's so powerful about this, especially as you're approaching this from a family unit,
Hmm.
is this is so inherent to human beings. Like that, the importance of storytelling and that
Hmm.
tradition is why we've survived this long, and why we keep evolving, and our family stories are so important.
Hmm.
I love that you've approached it this way, and the blueprint that you created is so powerful. I mean, talk about a tool
Yeah.
for parents and families to use. And is this something that families can use? Is it just for kids, or is it something that they can use throughout their lives?
The engagement method can be adapted right in many different
Hmm.
many different, and I don't think I realized it until I completed it and I was like, this is just how you engage in general.
Yeah.
Like this is how you engage. And there are different guides and resources depending on, I say that the engage method was built for any family because there
Hmm.
are guides if you have children of multiple ages, how do you keep them all engaged? If you have a child that's neurodiverse, how do you keep
Hmm.
them engaged? How do you read to them? How do you engage with them? So it can be used across the spectrum.
Hmm. That's great. And,
Mhm.
I've experienced this with my son. My daughter loves to read. My son
Yeah.
enjoys reading at school, but after school, like at home, has been a challenge.
Yeah.
And actually, I just got him a book. I should look up what the book is. And I'm going to get a copy myself so we can read it together. And that I've seen has really worked, and carving out that time. But I know I have been personally, it's hard for me because I love books, and
Yeah.
I love reading, and it's hard that with anything with your child, if they're not enjoying the thing that you're enjoying in the same way, that can be difficult. But can you talk a little bit about if you have a child who may be going through the engage method, but just isn't, as voracious of a reader, or just isn't as much of a reader, um, how should parents approach that? Is it something like I worry about it? Like, I keep at it, but I'm like, oh, I really hope this doesn't fall off when you go to college. He's a freshman in high school, so I'm like, I really hope this doesn't fall off when you go to college and into adulthood. One of the many things we parents worry about. But do you have any advice for parents if whether it's a little child, an older child, of how to work with them on that?
So I will say, right, is that I love that you said that you're going to go get the book and you're going to start reading it yourself because it's
Hmm.
one of the main things I start with parents is we hear about read alouds and we hear about reading to them, but it's really just all encompassing, right? The
Hmm.
shared reading experience. And that can look a number of ways. It can look like you on a road trip or in the car and playing an audiobook in the
Hmm.
car. It can look like you're cooking dinner and they're in the kitchen with you. Maybe you're cooking together and you're playing a book in
Hmm.
the kitchen. You can be listening to a book at the kitchen table. One of the parents in my community always talks about how she finishes her dinner so much faster than her kids, as most of us do. Most of us do.
Yeah.
And she'll just start reading to them at the table.
I love
Reading is
that.
not, yeah, reading is not going to look the same for every family.
Hmm.
You might be able to read a newspaper article. You might be able to read a poem,
Hmm.
just anything that interests them and interests you. I'll never want to tell parents you have to read this type of thing to your
Right.
kid because every kid is just not going to. Reading is beautiful,
Yeah.
but reading is a hobby, and
Yeah.
everybody is not attracted to every hobby. I think that if we focus on reading to them and sharing the experience with them, it'll still work,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
Like it'll still be this beautiful thing. And I don't know, I'm kind of losing track of what I'm saying, but I never want parents to get caught up in thinking that their child has to grow up to be this reader that's reading every day, every minute, because it just doesn't always happen that way. And
Yeah.
it's okay,
Yeah.
right?
And I think that's a really great point. Um, and I love the idea of, I know I'll speak for myself. I sort of get into this like linear idea of, okay, we have dinner, we make sure homework's done, we brush teeth, we make sure backpacks are packed, and then we read. Versus I love that idea of like reading at the dinner table.
Hmm.
I was going to ask you your opinion on audiobooks and
Oh,
if you
I
think
love it.
they, if it translates the same way. Um, I love that. And I actually, I'm a fan of audiobooks. I actually read one of Barack Obama's books. I was like a third of the way through and I was like, oh my God, I was just struggling with it. So I turned it on and he reads it and I was like, oh, it's like reading with Barack. Like this
Yeah.
is so fun. Just
Reading with
sometimes,
Barack. Oh,
yeah, sometimes
he
I'll
needs
do
the show
that.
now.
Yeah, exactly. Reading with Barack. Barack, if you're listening, Quinn will have you on. But again, getting out of that paradigm of like there's only one way to read and there's only one way to experience it. I think also to your point, and I was just looking it up. I'm sorry, I didn't want to be rude.
That's
But even turning to my community, so my best friend is a guy. He's
hmm
my age and he's a reader. And I was just saying, like, I want for Christmas, we do something you want, something you need, something to wear, something to read. Like, those are always the gifts that we do. And I was like, I just don't know what to get him for a book. He's 14, he's in high school, he's doing great, he's starting to date. And my friend Matt actually recommended this book by Jason Reynolds called 24 Seconds from Now. And Jason wrote the book because, are you familiar with it? Yeah, okay. And, wrote the book for kids, boys this age. And I was like, being able to talk to your community about books and reading and what you're looking for, um, I wouldn't have known that book and picked it up and thought like, oh, this is something that is even out there. I was kind of thinking, and I'll admit this, I love all books, but at his age, I loved like fantasy and sci-fi. He could care less. Like he is not into that at all. So I'm like, what do 14-year-old boys read? I don't know. And he's kind of done the graphic novel thing, which I think is also a really interesting way to engage your brain in reading. It's a little bit different, but um, in getting out of that sort of whatever your preconceptions are about reading is probably really important to this process and rediscovering that. I mean, what an exciting thing actually to rediscover reading and to make it your own. Like that's really exciting.
So parents, caregivers have to shift, I think, their mindset around what reading is and what reading can be. Actually have, and I can give you the link to a guide that I give to parents on 5 simple shifts to reimagine reading in your home.
Hmm.
And that is, it's a video and it's a guide of me just talking to parents about what they think reading is.
Mm.
Like, it doesn't, like we said, it doesn't have to look the same for everybody, but it is really getting to know your child,
Hmm.
what they're interested in, what their friend group is like. One of the stages of the engage method is all about honing in on what your child is interested in so you can use those things in order to bring them into the book with you. So if
Hmm.
you have an older kid, my son is 10,
Hmm.
right? Been reading to him for a while, but even that doesn't matter. Like you
Yeah.
think I've been reading to my child since they were in the womb, and but they just might not be into reading,
Yeah.
right? But anyway, so just grabbing his attention with little things like, hey, like, my son plays chess,
Hmm.
right? This kid is a chess player and this is happening. That's why I love so much what you said about going to get the book yourself and reading it. Start reading a book on your own.
Hmm.
Figure out what's going on in the book. And as you're talking to them, hey, I'm reading that book and
Yeah.
this is happening. And it's just like what's going on with you at school or just like what's going on with you here. And you're starting to bring them into the world. And then you can start to read it to them. Like you're
Yeah.
sitting at the table and you're like, I thought this part was really cool. And then you read a line or two about what's going on and you can talk about it.
Yeah.
And so it's not about starting a book, reading chapter for chapter every night. It's really, really looking at books as a tool, as a way to connect with your child. You may not finish the book.
Yeah.
You may carve out 30 minutes of reading time and only
Hmm.
use 5 minutes to actually read.
Hmm.
Like the magic of a book is not even the book itself. The magic of a book is what it does for your family, how it causes you guys. And I keep saying that thing about connection, right? But it's the thing.
Yeah.
We want our connection with our children to be strong so it carries them through a lifetime,
Yeah.
so that they know that we're here, that we'll always support them,
Hmm.
and they'll always remember. I had an author on my show, Nancy Chernin. She actually came on twice because the first time an author comes on or somebody comes on to talk about books or anything, it's just like an overview of what it is that they're doing
Hmm.
and why reading is important. And then the next time they come back, it's like a deeper dive
Hmm.
into what it is they have come on. And so her second episode, usually my episodes are like 20 to 30 minutes long. Her second episode was like an hour and 30 minutes. And she talked about this full circle moment that she had because her mother read to her and her siblings when they were kids, right?
Hmm.
She always modeled reading for them. And now, as she's guiding her mother through her elderly stages, right? She's losing her memory. And the thing that they still have together is books.
Mm.
She's reading to her mother. And she's not responding. She's not as responsive. If anybody out there if have aging parents and you're dealing with dementia or anything like that, you know how the situation can
Yeah.
be. But when she's reading books with her mom, it all comes back. Like,
Yeah.
and it's just it's a beautiful thing. It's
That's
really is.
beautiful. Yeah. Yeah. Um it's a really beautiful thing and it's a different connection. You know, I'm being silly when I say this, but it's not like she's looking at TikToks with her mom, you know.
Yeah.
It's a different type of connection and bond that they've built. That's really, really amazing. So I have to know what was, if you remember, what was the first book that you didn't finish and you've realized like, oh, I don't have to finish this book? Or do you don't want to say?
No, probably a Sister Soldier.
Mm. How far did you get?
Sister Soldier, because Oh, now I have to look up book titles, but the first couple of books I think I read from Sister Soldier were beautiful. I mean, they were what cult classics. I don't know what to call them, but
Yeah,
everybody was reading them,
yeah.
right? And then she released, oh, people are going to kill me for this, for this, but she released years later other books, and I'm like,
This
does
isn't,
she have a ghostwriter? What's happening?
we
But
don't hit every time.
yeah, but no, when I started working at Barnes and Noble, actually my interview, he asked me, he said, "Do you finish every book you read?" And I'm like, "Yeah." Like what? Who doesn't finish every, like you pick up a book and there's a goal. Like you
Right.
get to the end of the book no matter what, because something could change. You never know. The book could have been terrible for 398 pages, 399. That's
Yeah.
when the book gets good, right? So he was like, you don't have to commit to somebody else's inability to tell a story. And I was
Interesting.
like,
Yeah.
okay, all right. And that's when, I mean, but in the book world they call them DNF, did not finish.
Oh,
My pile,
yeah.
my pile is high.
Yeah.
It's high now.
That must be empowering. It's funny. I was laughing when you were like, you were saying something about books don't have to necessarily be like chapter by chapter. And I'm
Hmm.
like, but you have to, because if you're going to read 12 books a year and did it, you get into that much. I was actually Matt, my friend who recommended the book for my son, was saying, I want to read 12 books this year. And I said, well, why? What? He was like, well, one a month. And I was like, right, but why? And he was like, just to have a goal. And I was like, well, what if it was just 30 minutes a night and you see how many books you finish, but you're enjoying it, and I think that's something that I have struggled with. And same with the do not finish. Like I give it a third of the way through. And if I'm not feeling it, I'll read the end and see if it grabs me. And if it doesn't, it doesn't continue on. And it's really hard for me to do that. Um, and then do you have a preference of types of books that you like to read? Or is there anything that you've read recently that's just like captured you?
I'm reading. Well, I'm like you. I read a few different books at a time. And right now, Ta-Nehisi Coates' book, A Beautiful Struggle,
Hmm.
has all of my attention. So I could be reading anywhere from like 5 to 6 books at a time. And as soon as I pick up a book and I love it, I'm like, okay, all the other books go away. And it's not that the
Pulse. Yeah.
books are not great. Like
Yeah.
they're great,
Yeah.
but it's like you get enraptured in a world and like you don't want to let it go. But
Hmm.
I read all kinds of book. And there was a point in my children's book, I don't know what you would call it, career. I was doing author services. So I've been
Mm.
on like both sides, right? Because I have all these interests and passions I can't, can't let go of.
Yeah.
But so I read quite a large number of books, children's books and the like. Probably my favorite would probably nonfiction.
Hmm.
Yeah. I,
Yeah.
I love a good nonfiction self-help book. Hmm.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Which is probably why you're so amazing, because
Oh.
you're reading nonfiction self-help books, and you're connecting and internalizing them. Um,
Gosh, I can't
I
say they all have worked. No, I'm joking,
No.
but
Well, and it's interesting because, and I'm talking about my son a lot, but it's been an interesting journey with him because, again, my daughter just reads and,
Mhm.
is very similar to me in that way. And the books that he likes are historical nonfiction, which I'm like, from the time he was really little, I'm like,
Yeah.
what? But it's been really fun to see that. And it even opened up my eyes a little bit. I've recently gotten into feminist retellings of mythology, and I didn't know that was
Mm.
a thing. I just sort of like stumbled upon it. And as a kid, I loved Greek myths, and I'm like, this is
Okay.
so fun to reread these, to read these stories in a retelling from
Yeah.
women's perspectives where they were maybe like a line in the poem, or in the Odyssey it's like you're referred to twice in this
Interesting.
long thing.
Okay.
So it's just fun to kind of discover yourself through reading too in adulthood. It's like, oh, this is really fun.
Hmm.
um right now I'm looking at Connie Chung's memoir. She's up next. And I'm reading a
Okay.
book. I'm not gonna get the name right. But it's a nonfiction about a jewelry thief in Dallas, actually in Dallas in the
Oh.
1960s. It's like an unsolved case. So
Mhm.
that oddly has grabbed my attention as well. I want to be respectful of your time, and you spent so much time with us. Is there anything that I didn't touch on that you want to make sure our listeners hear or know?
I don't know. I just if you're struggling with how to approach reading, I would just really recommend that you go to my website and check
Mhm.
out the 5 simple shifts. So it's readingtoconnect.com/5 simple shifts. And if you're already into reading with your kids and you're trying to set an intention for 2025, there's a free guide for you there as well, readingtoconnect.com/set your intention. And if you go through the workbook, you go through the free guide, you'll actually get a certificate at the end, inviting you into the Reading to Connect family, because you've set your intention to read to your kids and connect with them throughout the year. So yeah, I think that's it.
I love that. And we'll make sure that that's in the show notes and on the website so people can find you easily. And that's sort of one of the three questions that I always ask people. So I'll ask you the other ones. What advice would you give to your younger self, knowing what you know now as it relates to it could be reading, parenting, starting a business, what advice would you give to yourself?
This is it. Don't
Yeah.
stray.
Yeah.
This is it, don't stray. No, but really, you have something to offer. And for the parents who are listening, you have something to offer to your children, no matter what your station is in life, no
Mhm.
matter what you're going through now. Your children want to know you, they want to connect with you, they want a relationship.
Mhm.
Take the time to hone in on that now, and stay open. I recently released a short podcast episode reminding parents to stay open to the different moments where your children come and they want to connect with you. A lot of times it can be so hard with everything we have going on to stop what they're doing. And if I have a couple minutes, can I share a story?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, so I'm sitting on the couch and I'm reading a book. My son's sitting next to me and he's playing a game. And I'm reading. I'm so into this book. Still, the Ta-Nehisi Coates, a Beautiful Struggle.
Mhm.
And he's like, Mom, you should switch books. And he knows me. Like he
Yeah.
knows like I'm switching, like I have a stack of books next to me and I could be reading anyone. And so I'm like, oh, okay, well, just give me a bookmark so I can put the bookmark in this and move on to the next one. And he hands me the book and it's my Bible. And I'm like, I don't want to read this right now. Like,
Why did he hand you the Bible?
and so I'm like, okay, we can read it. He wanted me to read to him,
Oh, amazing.
but it led to a
Did he do something?
conversation.
No, I'm just kidding.
It led to a conversation because we started in, and I don't want this to go into like a deeply religious conversation, but
Yeah.
we started reading in Genesis about creation, and
Hmm.
it led to a conversation about what's going on right now with the fires, with the wildfires in LA.
Mm-hmm.
And I would have never heard his thoughts, I don't think, about what was going on because so many times disasters happen in our world and things are going on. And we hope our children don't know
Hmm.
everything. Like we hope that we can keep them in like this bubble, but we can't anymore because they have so much, they're so connected to the world outside of us.
Yeah.
There's no way to keep it from him. I had no idea all the thoughts that were going through his mind about what was going on. I could have said, I don't want to read that right now. I'm going to stick to this.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I know that it's hard as parents because depending on the kids you have, they could talk quite a bit.
Yeah.
They can ask 50 million questions. They can,
Yes.
and sometimes it gets hard. But yeah, just a reminder to stay open.
Now, I'm curious, did he pick the passage or was it where you left off?
No, I just opened up because honestly, I have not picked up my Bible in quite some time.
Hmm.
Um, he asked me for one a couple weeks ago or like a
Hmm.
month ago or something like that.
Hmm.
And I just said, we'll go to the store and we'll pick one out. We're not heavy churchgoers,
Hmm.
but we believe,
Yeah.
And so So I've been kind of putting it off. And so when he hit up, we just started from the beginning
Yeah.
because it was where we were in the
Yeah.
beginning.
And what was, if you're comfortable sharing,
Yeah.
what was his thoughts? Like, what connection did he make?
He was talking about when we were reading about creation and we were talking about how God formed the world,
Hmm.
and the different things, he started asking me about this could go so many different
Yeah.
ways, right? Why does God allow certain things to happen?
Yeah.
If God can create these things, if God can put these things in place, then why is it that he can't stop things from being in
Hmm.
place? My son goes to a STEM school.
Hmm.
He's really into science. And he talks about different things and why things happen all the time and like the different the scientific reasons behind why wildfires happen and things like that.
Right.
Everybody has their own points of view on why everything is going on, but he was really digging into that. Like if this is the case, then why is it allowed? And I
Hmm.
think that those are questions that many of us ask, and have asked throughout our lives. And I wasn't prepared for every question that he had
Hmm.
at all, but I listened,
Yeah.
and some things I said, let's dig into that together because
Yeah.
mom doesn't know. Like I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's it's also interesting with books, and I don't want to offend anybody by calling the Bible a book or the Torah a book or any religious script a book, but approaching what are your thoughts on approaching religious texts?
Hmm.
Because there's so much there, and Aiden sounds like a really smart kid,
Hmm.
and not necessarily having the context, and it doesn't even have to be religious. I mean, there's lots of books that
Yeah.
our kids read, and I like that this method actually sort of solves what I'm talking about. What I was about to say is like, what are your thoughts on um, how to help them digest it and have context around things. And
Hmm.
I love that he was seeking answers
Yeah.
from a spiritual text, and that's
Hmm.
really beautiful. Um, but there's, as someone who grew up Catholic and is certainly not a scholar in the Bible, but familiar with stories. There's some stuff in there that as a kid, I'm always like, huh? Like,
Yeah.
it's like, what? Even as an adult, I'm sometimes like, huh?
Yeah.
But this method actually eliminates what I was just about to say, because there's some stuff in there. I'll take the Constitution, for example. The Constitution without context isn't really helpful. Like I'll talk to
Mhm.
my kids about it and be like, at that time, this was the viewpoint on policies. So
Mhm.
if we're applying that today in a very different world, are we reading it word for word? Are we reading the intention? What was the intention? How do we find out what the intention was?
Mhm.
Um, and this, I just love this method because I'm answering my own question that I haven't even asked you yet. It's just like, how do you approach these sort of maybe more complex readings with your children, because you don't want to shy away from it.
Yeah.
And the insight you got into his brain is
Mhm.
really that's really special. That's really special. And then the other thing is, what do you love most about this work that you're doing?
Thank you. So the first question is, I think it's something we can carry through our life, not being afraid to be wrong, not being afraid to tell our children we don't know and we need to look into it.
Yeah.
I think one of the strengths of doing the work that I do and in the past offering services to authors and working with them, on their books is the knowledge that many of them give us the answers. Like many
Hmm.
of them are well researched in what it is that they're writing about. A well-written book is usually coming from somebody who has so much information on what is going on. There are so many in the course I talk about connection clues and missable moments, right? And
Hmm.
so there are connection clues in the book that the author gives to us, things that they put in the book, the author's note in the back. There's sometimes surprises hidden in the jacket. There's so
Yeah.
much information on the author website, and that's why I want parents to get out of feeling like they have to get through the whole book in one sitting,
Yeah.
because really there's so many missable moments.
Yeah.
There's so
Yeah.
many missable moments when you do that. It's like your child asks a question, and many of us as parents, and I can admit that I was like this too. They ask a question,
Mhm.
and like, just let me get through the book. Like, let me finish the book, and then you
Yeah.
can ask your questions. And it's like, no, stop right there.
Hmm.
Because you don't know what's going to come from that. And that's the most important thing.
Yeah.
Um, the next thing you said about what do I love most? I think it's the transformation in the kids. So I do community read louds, right? And many times, like it's all ages.
Hmm.
Okay. There was one girl that would come out every single time and she was quiet. She kind of stood in the back. She was like, she's 14, probably 16 now.
Hmm.
And I don't know, like, I don't know why I felt like she was there at the
Hmm.
time, but I'm like, is she enjoying this? Because I'm reading
Hmm.
to ages probably 3 to 11.
Hmm.
Okay. We're in the group, in this particular group. And I'm like, she comes out and she's just like watching her siblings, like, what's going on? And one day she came to me, and I tell parents you don't have to be an actress or an actor in order to read a book to your child, right?
Right.
But I get into it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I get into it. I pull the kids in. And she said to me one day, she was like, I love the way you read. Can I read? And I said, huh? You want to? And she said, yeah. She was like, if you can I read a book when you're done to the kids? And I said, of course you can. And it was just so clear to me that she had been just paying attention this whole time to the different techniques and things. Many of them I talk about in the course, but to the different techniques and things I was using to pull these kids in. And I was just sitting there and I'm like, oh, like
Yeah.
such a be, and you don't, and they moved. We're in Dallas. They moved back to their home state, but you just never know how it's going to impact a child, whether it's your child or another child. When you pick up a book and you use that time to read to them, I mean, books. Just like I've been saying from the beginning, they transform homes, but they can really, really impact a child in such a beautiful way.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Mhm.
Absolutely. And I think it's interesting how one of the through lines that I'm getting in all of this as well is leading with curiosity. And I
Yes.
love that that young woman led with curiosity. She
Mhm.
didn't let, oh, this is for little kids or, something grabbed her. And that's really very special. Well, this has been such a wonderful conversation. I know both of our kids are supposed to be doing homework and we probably need to check on them. It's very quiet, which is good, but also and this has just been such an amazing conversation. I'll have all of your information so people can find you and start using the engage method. I am going to make an affirmation for our family, a reading affirmation, which I've never done.
Yeah.
I kind of feel bad saying that because reading is really important, but I've never made that for us. So I'm looking forward to doing that. Thank you for spending so much time with us, and thank you for the work that you're doing. It's really important. And this is just a totally different way to not only approaching reading, but to approaching family and community. And it's really beautiful. So thank you for sharing that.
Thank you, Megan. And thank you for your work. Thank you for having me on. It's been a wonderful conversation. Really enjoyed talking to you. Thank you.
Fantastic.